So, it is finally October, which means now we can talk about some scary stuff. And I don't just mean bad video games. Yeah. So, today, to start out our month, we are going to talk about the Mummy series of video games. And just to make myself clear, we are going to cover all of the Mummy games except the Scorpion King. And, it was a Scorpion King PS2 game. And the reason that we're not going to talk about that one is because I don't really consider it horror related, even though it is related to the Mummy series. But for the purpose of this, I'm just going to focus on games in the main Mummy series. And we're also going to ignore the Mummy Demastered, which is based on the 2017 film that starred Tom Cruise that really sucked. The Mummy Demastered, of course, being a downloadable game. So, let's jump right in. But before we get started, I'm going to comment on the fact that it is October. We are experiencing 90-degree weather for the first half of the month, which is very unusual for my region of the United States where I live. So right now it doesn't feel very Halloween-y. Anyway, we're way off topic. Let's get started. So, as you know, The Mummy is a 1999 film. Actually, it was a series of films that spanned from 1999 to 2008 that starred Brendan Fraser. And of course, the first movie was an absolute hit, which means there's going to be a video game tie-in, which happened in 2000. But here is the thing about the Mummy video game that was released. It is more or less a Tomb Raider clone. Not saying that Tomb Raider clones are bad, it just didn't do a very good job of being a clone of Tomb Raider. So let me start with, this is probably going to be the first game that we mention here, will probably be the only one on the list that I really go really in depth in, because it is the one that I've played the most over and over and over again. So the game, it has a lot of positives. It's got really good level layouts for the most part. And it's got a decent, I guess you could say, it's got decent, puzzles that you would find in a typical game like this, just like Tomb Raider. And there was quite a few bad things about the game. The one thing I noticed as soon as I started the game was the voice acting. It was atrocious. It kinda didn't sound like the characters from the movie. Of course, it does have cutscenes that, have the actors in them, and then you get the actual characters that are voiced on screen, and it sounds nothing like them. Which, in games like this, that they don't hire the original actors from the movies and tie-ins, some of the voices, they get sound-alikes, and they sound terrible, and then you get some that are, pretty spot on. Another good example of that is the 2005 game Robots, which is based on the animated CGI animated film Robots. Rodney Copperbottom in the game does not sound anything like his movie counterpart. The voice actor in that game, I'm trying to remember, he has done quite a bit of voiceover work for commercials and cartoons and whatnot, and he just sounds nothing like Rodney in the film sounds. Of course, Rodney being voiced by Ian McGregor with an American accent. So anyway, in the Mummy game, It just doesn't sound anything like Brendan Fraser. I mean, it kind of does, but it's just something is off about it. And I mean, I could go on about the problems, but I really don't want to dwell on that. I will mention that the camera in the game gets a bit tricky, which, you got to live with it. But overall, I have a lot of nostalgia for this game, even though it's not the greatest game in the world. I remember getting this. I actually have a copy if you've seen my PS1 collection. The first copy I ever owned, I bought at an Ames department store around November 2001. And then I somehow over the years lost it. And then I found another copy from a vendor at a local flea market for $5, which wasn't too bad. So, I have a lot of nostalgia for this particular game. So, overall, I recommend giving it a try. At least play it once and see how you like it. Like I said, it is a Tomb Raider clone. If you like Tomb Raider, you might like this game. So just kind of pick up a copy and give it a try. The next one is The Mummy for Game Boy Color, and there's not really much I can say about this. I have played it. I borrowed a copy from my friend when I was in, third grade. When I was in third grade, I borrowed a copy of it from my friend Greg. And I beat it, I think, in about 2 days. I can't remember. I remember the level layouts and everything. I remember them pretty well. Actually, I think I beat the game. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I beat the game in 1 day, actually. And then I replayed it the next day. I can't remember the details of that, but I have played this one. It's a decent Game Boy game. Of course, Game Boy games are pretty low-tech anyway, and the levels aren't too bad in this game, so if you like Game Boy games, you might want to give it a try. But for me, I'm not really a big Game Boy Color person unless it's like Pokemon, or like Tetris or something like that. But it's something that you might want to give a try. Next up is the Mummy Returns for the PS2. This was the better of the games. It was real action-oriented. It kind of reminded me of, like, I don't know what to compare it to. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, I think, maybe? I don't know. The levels were really well thought out in this game, and the puzzles too. Once again, it is a Tomb Raider clone, more or less. Of course, all of the Mummy games are more or less Tomb Raider clones when you come to think of it, because it involves archaeology and whatnot and all that jazz. But the game was released in 2002. I actually remember buying this the day after it came out, and I really enjoyed it. Of course, this is when I had a fat model PS2, and then eventually it broke down shortly after that, and I didn't own another one for years until I had my Slim. And my Slim PS2 finally broke about a year ago, and so I replaced it with a fat model. So there's that. But overall, this game you definitely got to give a try. If you play any game in the Mummy series, it's got to be this one. Of course, there was a game after this based on the Scorpion King, which I was not, too big into. Of course, for the purpose of this list, we're not going to talk about the Scorpion King. We're only going to focus on the Mummy games. Next up is the Mummy Returns for the Game Boy Color. Just like the previous game in this series, it is for the Game Boy Color, and like I said, there's not really much you could say about it. The level designs are pretty decent. I actually bought this one from a pawn shop back around 2005. I think I paid $4.99, I believe, for it. And it's not a bad game. Of course, for me, Game Boy Colors really aren't my cup of tea unless they're Pokemon. So if you want to give it a try, by all means, go ahead. Next up is The Mummy for the Game Boy Advance, and this particular game is not based on any of the movies, but it's actually based on the animated series, which is based on The Mummy Returns. The level design is pretty decent. I actually bought this game new back around 2003 when I had a Game Boy Advance SP, and it's not a bad game. The game actually came out in November 2002. It came out shortly after the two Mummy Returns games came out. I think about a month or so. I can't really remember exactly, but it was a pretty decent game. Of course, it's an adaptation of the TV show, the animated series. So, if you're a fan of the movies, and strictly the movies, you might not enjoy this one as much. It might seem a little out there. But of course, with movie properties, you get animated series. For example, Jumanji got an animated series. Men in Black had an animated series. So you get the gist of it. So this one I only recommend if you are a fan of the animated series. And last but not least, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. It came out for PS2, Wii, and there was also a version for the DS. Instead of separating the DS from the rest of them, we're going to talk about the DS version first. It's a DS game. It's pretty decent. I believe I rented it. I can't remember if someone gave one to me or I rented it or borrowed it. I can't remember, but I have played it back around 2009. The DS version is it's pretty decent for a DS game. On the other hand, the movie itself, I disliked. I hated Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, and I don't know why. It felt like, I think it's where they had the characters more or less, they aged them and they settled them down, and it just did not feel like the right movie anymore. And it had nothing to do with Brendan Fraser getting older. It was with the fact that the action was decent in the movie, but they just shouldn't have done what they did. As for the PS2 and Wii version of the game, the DS version, let me get back to the DS version for a moment. I only recommend it if you have a DS and you want to give it a try. Otherwise, you might want to skip that one. Now let's get back to the PS2 and the Wii version. The games for those two systems, it's not bad. It's pretty decent. It still feels like a Tomb Raider clone to me. Of course, it always will. But the puzzles were pretty decent. The action was pretty decent. Not as good as the Mummy Returns video game, though. Not as good. Of course, this game came out late in the life cycle of the PS2. I actually prefer the PS2 version over the Wii version, but that's just me. But if you think it's something that you would like to play, by all means give it a try. Out of the all of the versions of Tomb of the Dragon's Emperor, I recommend the PS2 version. Of course, if you are a DS or a Wii collector, by all means you have those versions available to you also. The one thing I never really quite understood is why they didn't go ahead and just make a Xbox 360 and PS3 version of the game. Of course, it was 2008 when the movie and the game came out. So they had plenty of time to prepare. version, a version for those two systems. But for whatever reason, they decided not to. Either that, or they didn't have the budget, or they just neglected it completely. They're like, well, we've been working on this game for these systems for the past 2 years, so we're just gonna make it for those systems and throw in the cash and not worry about it. That was probably most likely the case. So if you want to give it a try for any of those 3 systems that I mentioned, then go ahead. It's not too bad, and I think you will find it to be a pretty decent game. So that is our coverage of the Mummy games. Like I said, we are not going to cover the Scorpion King game or the game, the mobile game, I guess you could say, or the downloadable game. I think it's a downloadable game for the 2017 Mummy film. So we're just going to leave it at that and just kind of walk away. Just walk away. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All this month for October, we're going to be doing like horror-themed video game stuff and be talking about it. So if you have any suggestions for any videos we should cover, you have until October 20th, 2019 to submit your ideas in the comments down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out if you do. Hit the bell if you want notifications of when you want to see more awesome videos. And until next time, I will see ya.